Have you ever wondered why certain men seem to unravel in your presence? Not because of anything you've done, but because of something you simply are. There are women whose energy moves like an unspoken language, whose mere being presses against the edges of a man's carefully built defenses. She does not touch him, yet she pulls threads from the seams of his composure. She awakens something both primal and forbidden, something he has worked his entire life to bury under ambition, bravado, and the appearance of control. In Jung's world, the shadow is not the darkness one flaunts, but the darkness one hides, even from oneself. And when a woman moves in her quiet sovereignty without the need to prove, plead, or possess, she becomes the mirror he didn't consent to look into. He begins to see the parts of himself that feel too dangerous to acknowledge: his need for validation, his fear of inadequacy, his craving for tenderness that he has long mistaken for weakness. She doesn't chase him, and therein lies the threat. A man who has grown accustomed to being the center of gravity is disoriented when a woman does not orbit him. This disorientation is not mild, it is the slow cracking of his inner architecture. He feels it as fascination at first, the curiosity that draws him closer. But the closer he gets, the more the hidden weight of his own unexamined truths begins to press upon him. It is the kind of presence that forces him into confrontation with himself, not through accusation or demand, but through the unbearable neutrality of a gaze that does not require him. This is a gaze that doesn't hunger, a gaze that sees but does not cling. And in this refusal to feed his ego, you awaken in him the first shadow, the gnawing recognition that his worth has always been tied to being wanted, not to being whole. The second shadow rises from silence, the kind that feels intentional, when you do not rush to fill the air with explanations, validations, or emotional cushioning. He is left to feel the full echo of his own thoughts. Many men are unaccustomed to this kind of stillness. They have lived in constant noise, external approval, digital distractions, the chatter of friends and lovers, anything to keep from hearing themselves. But in your stillness, he hears his own untempered longing, the hollow space between who he is and who he pretends to be. There is danger here because the male ego resists exposure. The masculine shadow, when stirred, can oscillate between desire and resentment, between reaching for you and retreating into himself. But you do not pursue, and this refusal to participate in the dance of reassurance drives him deeper into his own labyrinth. Jung would call this the confrontation with the anima, the feminine principle within a man that he has either idealized or demonized, but never truly integrated. You become, in his psyche, the embodiment of that anima, the mysterious, the untouchable, the one who knows. Without a touch, you press against the third shadow, his latent fear of being insignificant. A man can conquer boardrooms, lead armies, or stand atop the scaffolding of his accomplishments, yet still tremble before the possibility of being invisible to a woman who commands her own life. Your lack of need becomes a quiet indictment of the power he thought he had. This awakening is not loud. It does not happen in grand scenes or theatrical arguments. It happens in the moments he least expects. When you laugh without looking at him, when you leave a room without explanation, when you are absorbed in something that has nothing to do with him. He feels the shift like a temperature drop, a reminder that your world spins on an axis that is not his. Men are rarely taught how to meet this kind of energy. In a culture that rewards dominance and possession, he has learned that to want is to acquire. But here, he cannot acquire you, because you are not an object in his grasp. You are a force in your own orbit. This realization is the fourth shadow, his inability to control the source of his desire. And control, for many men, is the scaffolding upon which their sense of safety rests. Remove it, and the entire structure sways. Your presence becomes an unspoken test. Can he meet you without needing to own you? Can he witness you without trying to bend you to his will? For most, the answer is no. And yet, he cannot walk away from the question you represent. That is the paradox. You awaken the shadows not to harm him, but simply by existing in your wholeness. And wholeness, in the presence of someone who is not yet whole, will always feel like both temptation and threat. You are not his healer, nor his mirror by choice. But the unconscious does not require permission to be stirred. Once touched, even without hands, it begins its restless movement. And that is the most dangerous thing of all. the fact that you can awaken this in him without ever laying a finger on his skin. He will begin to notice the shifts within himself, though he may not name them. Restlessness takes root. His thoughts, once orderly, now drift toward you in quiet moments, while driving, while working, even in the company of others. It is not mere attraction, it is a disturbance in the psyche, an uninvited question that lingers. Why can't I shake her presence? Jung knew this well. When the unconscious is stirred, it demands resolution, whether through transformation or destruction. This is where the fifth shadow begins to rise, the confrontation with his own dependence on emotional supply. Many men, though they do not admit it, are addicted to the constant drip of female approval. It is the subtle nod of validation, the easy forgiveness, the reassurance that he is enough. But when a woman refuses to play this role, when her eyes neither flatter nor condemn, but simply observe, he feels the withdrawal as sharply as an addict without his drug. The silence of your approval becomes louder than any spoken rejection. He may grow defensive, seeking to diminish you in his mind. He will tell himself you are aloof, cold, perhaps even arrogant. This is the ego's armor, a desperate attempt to shield him from the truth, that he has measured his masculinity not by his depth, but by his ability to command attention. And now that your attention is not his by default, the scaffolding trembles again. The human spirit resists change, especially when that change begins in the shadows. You continue, without effort, to awaken what he has avoided, the buried tenderness he has labeled as weakness. This is the sixth shadow, his exiled vulnerability. Society has taught him that softness is dangerous, that emotion makes him prey, and so he has hidden it beneath sarcasm, intellect, or conquest. But something in your stillness calls to that tenderness, drawing it upward like a seed reaching for light. The very presence that unsettles his ego also whispers to the child within him, the one who once knew love without fear, before the world taught him to guard it. And yet, this awakening is not gentle. Vulnerability, when it has been buried too long, rises like water through cracked stone, disruptive, unstoppable, and often frightening. He may feel anger toward you for making him feel what he has worked so hard to numb. He will not understand that it was never you making him feel, only you allowing him no place to hide from what was already there. This is the paradox of feminine power, to awaken without force, to provoke without intent. The seventh shadow, the final and most dangerous, is his fear of transformation. Jung taught that the meeting of opposites, the masculine with the feminine, the conscious with the unconscious, is the crucible in which individuation is born. But individuation requires death before rebirth, the death of illusions, of false identities, of comfortable lies. And few are ready to bury the man they have pretended to be. You stand as both the invitation and the threat to this transformation. To step toward you is to step toward the dissolution of the ego's safe walls. To step away from you is to accept a life half-lived. This choice, though often unspoken, is the true tension between you. His yearning to merge with the wholeness you embody, and his terror at the cost of doing so. In these moments, his gaze upon you carries more than desire. It carries projection. You are no longer simply yourself in his eyes. You have become the canvas upon which his shadow paints its truths. You can feel it in the weight of his attention, in the way his voice changes when he speaks to you, in the almost imperceptible pauses, as if searching for words that never arrive. Yet you remain unclaimed, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. You know that the shadows you awaken are not yours to carry, nor yours to heal. To take them on would be to rob him of the very initiation he needs. And so you keep your distance, not as a game, but as an act of respect, for yourself and for the sacred work his soul must do alone. This is the unspoken truth about women who walk in their own light. They do not awaken shadows to destroy men. They awaken shadows because truth cannot help but rise in their presence. And once risen, it can never fully return to sleep. He will not admit it openly, but you have unsettled the coordinates of his inner map. Where once he walked the world with a sense of predictable dominance, now there is uncertainty, an awareness that the terrain beneath him is less stable than he believed. This unease follows him into places he thought immune to you, in the quiet moments before sleep, in the split second after laughter fades, in the stillness between words. It is here, in these liminal spaces, that the shadows you've stirred begin their real work. For the male psyche, unaccustomed to confrontation with its own depths, this work feels like erosion. His old patterns, how he seduced, how he impressed, how he silenced doubt, no longer function in your presence. He senses, without knowing why, that these strategies are transparent to you. You are not moved by his accolades, nor softened by his charm. You stand like a still body of water, reflecting back not his performance, but his truth. And truth, for a man unprepared to see it, is a merciless mirror. The strange part is this. The more his ego resists you, the more his soul leans toward you. Jung wrote of the anima as a bridge to the unconscious, a guiding figure whose presence can lead a man to his wholeness, if he has the courage to follow. But to follow you, even in spirit, would mean relinquishing the armor he has spent decades forging. It would mean allowing parts of himself to die, and the dying of an identity can feel like the dying of the man himself. You sense this tension in him, the push and pull, the hunger and retreat. He may reach out only to vanish. He may speak of you to others in half-formed sentences, as though naming you too clearly would solidify your influence. But the truth is, your influence is not something he can contain. Once a shadow is awakened, it moves through him whether he resists or not. There is a peculiar loneliness in being the woman who carries this effect. It is not the loneliness of lack, but of knowing that the connection is not meant to be consumed. You see him not as he is now, but as he could be if he chose the path inward. And yet, you also know that his choice is beyond your jurisdiction. To try to coax him would be to dilute the power of the awakening. Shadows must be met willingly, or they will turn corrosive. So you remain the unanswered question in his life. You remain the echo he cannot place, the scent he catches in dreams but cannot name. Your absence does not erase you, it distills you. In time, he may come to understand that what you stirred in him was not desire alone, but the possibility of wholeness. This realization may arrive years later, in the arms of another woman, or in a moment of solitude when the noise has finally gone still. Some men, confronted with such an awakening, will attempt to replicate it elsewhere. They will search for your energy in different faces, different voices, different bodies. But energy born of authenticity cannot be replicated through substitution. It is not the curve of your smile or the sound of your voice that lingers. It is the way your existence refused to confirm his illusions. That is what haunts him. That is what calls him back to the shadows you left behind. And perhaps, though he will never confess it, there is a part of him that hopes he never truly escapes it. Because even in the discomfort, there is something alive in him now that was dormant before. The shadows you awakened were not curses. They were invitations. And while his ego may frame you as a disruption, his deeper self knows you were a threshold. You, after all, did not awaken anything that was not already there. You simply stood without reaching, watched without demanding, and lived without centering him. In doing so, you became a kind of spiritual pressure, subtle, relentless, and impossible to ignore. Over time, the shadows you've stirred begin to change shape inside him. At first, they were raw and jagged, edges of fear, resentment, and craving. But shadows, when left to mature in the quiet of the unconscious, soften. They begin to whisper instead of roar. He notices them in the smallest moments, a pause before speaking, a different choice made in anger, a sudden urge to linger in silence instead of filling it. Though he may not attribute it to you, the imprint of your presence remains in these shifts. You have become part of his internal architecture, not as a possession, but as a blueprint for something larger. This is the paradox of your influence. You do not belong to him, yet you live within him. It is not a tether, but an echo, guiding him toward the parts of himself he has long denied. The male psyche resists surrender, yet here it finds itself drawn to an unfamiliar kind of yielding, not to you as a person, but to the inner work you represent. Jung would say this is the meeting point of anima and shadow, where the feminine becomes a guide through darkness rather than an object of conquest. This guide is rarely welcomed with open arms. She is feared, resisted, sometimes even vilified. But she remains, as all archetypes do, unshaken by his perception of her. You know this, and because you know, you neither cling to his awakening nor protect him from it. The instinct to comfort is absent, replaced by a deeper respect for the integrity of his process. You understand that to soften too soon would collapse the structure of what has been set in motion. Growth requires the friction of absence as much as the gift of presence. This is why your distance is not cruelty, it is alchemy. It forces him to generate within himself the qualities he once sought from you. If he craves validation, he must find it in his own reflection. If he yearns for intimacy, he must learn to face the tender parts of himself without shame. And if he desires the calm strength he feels in your presence, he must build it from the inside out, stone by stone. Men who are unready for this journey will attempt to escape it. They will drown themselves in distraction, return to women who soothe rather than stir, or bury themselves in work, believing productivity can replace transformation. But the truth of shadow work is this: once the door is cracked open, the room is never again fully dark. He can ignore it, but he can no longer unsee it. And somewhere in the quiet, he knows this is your doing. There will be moments when he feels a strange gratitude toward you, though it may be tinged with frustration. Gratitude, because you awakened something vital in him. Frustration, because you did so without giving him the comfort of possession. This is the wound and the gift of such encounters. They do not complete a man, but they reveal to him the possibility of completion. If he is wise, he will begin the slow turning inward. He will study the movements of his own mind, the reflexes of his ego, the roots of his longing. He will learn, perhaps for the first time, the difference between love and ownership. And when he does, he will see you clearly, not as an enigma to be solved, but as a mirror that once reflected the man he could become. Until then, you remain the woman who touched nothing, yet changed everything. The one whose absence was more formative than another's presence could ever be. The one who reminded him, simply by being, that his true work was never to win you, but to meet himself. There comes a point when the memory of you stops being about desire and starts being about truth. He begins to realize that what haunted him was not the shape of your body, the sound of your laughter, or the way your eyes seemed to see too much. It was the way you existed without permission. You moved in your own rhythm, untouched by the gravitational pull of his ego. And this independence was more intoxicating and more terrifying than any form of seduction he had ever known. The male psyche, conditioned to believe it is the hunter, rarely considers what it means to encounter prey that does not run. You did not flee, but you also did not yield. Instead, you stood still, neither inviting nor rejecting, forcing him to confront the uncomfortable truth. His power depended on participation, and you offered none. In this stillness, he saw the cracks in his authority, and through those cracks, the shadows emerged. This is the deeper work of the feminine archetype in Jungian thought, not to be the conquest, but to be the catalyst. To awaken in him the hunger for wholeness, knowing that this hunger will either elevate or undo him. And while he may never voice it, some part of him understands that you were never his to begin with. Your role was to awaken the archetype within him that he had long suppressed, the anima as guide, the shadow as teacher. In the quiet nights when his mind drifts, he remembers your detachment. It was not indifference, it was sovereignty. You did not need him to confirm your worth, and that absence of need struck deeper than any insult could have. It showed him what it looked like to live without leaning on another for self-definition. It revealed the hollowness of his own constant search for mirrors to reflect his significance. If he chooses the path of avoidance, he will speak of you as if you were an oddity, someone too proud, too untouchable. But if he chooses the path of growth, he will understand that your untouchability was not armor, but clarity. You did not stand apart to withhold. You stood apart because your inner world was already full. And fullness cannot be bartered for crumbs. Time will pass, and your image in his mind will shift. You will no longer be the mysterious figure who stirred his blood, but the archetype of the moment his old life no longer fit. You will be the marker, the line in the sand between who he was and who he might become. And though his ego may try to erase you, the deeper self remembers. The deeper self always remembers the threshold. For you, this was never about him alone. The awakening of shadows is the natural consequence of living in your truth. Men, women, the world itself. Everything that comes near you is touched by the quiet force of your presence. Some are drawn closer, ready to meet themselves. Others recoil, unable to bear the light that reveals their darkness. But none remain unchanged. This is the hidden discipline of the empowered feminine: to hold the line even when the other falters, to resist the temptation to step into the role of savior, to trust that the work of the soul cannot be rushed. You know that the shadows you awaken are not yours to resolve. You simply set the mirror in place and let him decide whether to look. And in this knowing, there is freedom. Freedom from the need to be understood, from the compulsion to be chosen, from the illusion that your value is measured by his ability to keep you. You are not his anchor. You are the wind that stirs his sails toward uncharted waters, whether he sails or not. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.